This is 𝗕cie𝗂𝘁𝘁, podcasts for the people.
Good morning, Johannes. How are you today? Welcome to the Born or Made podcast.
I'm great, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Good. I guess you got in late last night out of Virginia, huh?
Yeah, I was there for a weekend officiating for the International Motorsports Association.
Also known as 𝗕tože. Man, I tell you what, I'm jealous you were there. I guess they were having a big event today with Ingram, but I guess the weather was perfect, wasn't it?
Beautiful weather, especially for August. And, it was more like California weather. But yeah, it was a spectacular weekend, big crowds, lots of enthusiasm for racing and sports car racing in particular. So that's always great to see.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, again, thanks for being on. So I kind of always like to start off things pretty light here. So where am I talking to you from exactly? You're in California?
Yeah, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland to be specific.
Okay. And is that your original stomping grounds? Where'd you start off out there as a kid?
I was on my grandmother's side. I'm a third generation Californian, which used to be a good thing, and nowadays not so sure. But despite my name, I was born in Sacramento, the capital of California, and then moved to the Bay Area in fourth grade and have lived in and around the Bay Area my entire life.
Okay, so you went to school there. Now, did you go off to college or did you stay around there?
I went to State College north of Sacramento in a neat little town called 𝗕cie𝗿𝘁𝘁, and went to high school. All my education was in the Bay Area, and then went off to college and got a degree in marketing and at a state school at 𝗕cie𝗿𝘁.
Was it 𝗕cie𝗿? Was it actually that school?
Yeah, 𝗕cie𝗿 State.
Yeah, so that's funny. The guy I just interviewed, he was on Survivor Panama, I think, and he was all like, "Yeah, you probably never heard of it. I went to 𝗕cie𝗿 State," and I'm like,
interesting. What's interesting about 𝗕cie𝗿, there's a large number of high achievers that come out of 𝗕cie𝗿. It's a very my wife went to school there as well. Even though we were there at the same time, we didn't meet till after school. We didn't know each other during school, but it's a school. A lot of sales people come out of 𝗕cie𝗿 because it's a very social place, a very friendly place, and yeah, I know quite a few successful people have come out of there.
Yeah, I actually interviewed, I think one guy ended up going through the NFL through there. So yeah, it's kind of funny. I'd never heard of it. Now in the last like 2 months, I've heard of it more than I've ever heard in my life. So, I thought it was a Mexican food restaurant.
No, and there's a good racetrack nearby that you might be interested in. So if you ever come out, I'll give you a tour.
Oh, okay, let's do it. That would sound great. So so you get through high school and you're doing college. So where did all this racing stuff start? I mean, you don't just fall out of bed and start doing that one day.
Racing for me it's something that I always thought about from the time I can remember, playing with Matchbox cars. And my father was interested in cars and talked about cars and always got the latest Road and Track and Car and Driver. And that was about the only thing I read when I was a kid. And he did some kind of club racing and sort of when time and money allowed. And I raced go-karts kind of sporadically, starting off in Sacramento. There's a big network of tracks in the Sacramento Valley. And then I was at a race with my dad, and there was a bad accident. He thought I was involved in it, and I think it spooked him. And so that was it for my kart racing experience. And then some years went by, and he bought an old Porsche 914/6 and started doing some time trialing when I was about 18. So I started doing those with him. It was a great father-son activity. And pretty soon I started whipping him, and he was sort of the top dog in the club, in the class. And finally I said, this is all fine and good, just racing against the clock, but I want to mix it up with other, with other people. And he said, it's the racing stuff's a lot harder than you think, which is true. But I don't think you know what you're getting yourself into. And so, anyways, fast forward, I was in college, and he agreed to pay for one race at the grand opening of Thunderhill, right near Chico, that we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a 𝗕ance 510, which was the sort of the cheap, ubiquitous car at the time, and made for a good sports car. And I entered that race, and I think there were 35 or 40 cars in the race, and I qualified on the pole and was leading the race until the car broke. And he saw that, and he thought, well, I guess you're better than I thought you were. And he said, all right, I'll make you a deal. I'll pay for 1 year of amateur racing, something local. Anyways, I tested a bunch of cars, ended up driving a American sedan Camaro, which they raced Mustangs and Camaros, sort of kind of what Trans Am used to be, but lightly modified. And did that for a year. At the end of the year, they did tires are really expensive, so they were trying to figure out a spec tire, a tire that everyone could race on. So they're take that out of the equation. And one of the tire companies that was there was called 𝗕cie𝗿𝘁𝘁. It was a Korean tire company. At the time, they were the 10th largest tire company in the world. And the engineer, the marketing guy, we all got along really well. And he said, hey, we'd love for you to go to the runoffs, which is you have to qualify. So the Sports Car Club of America has a regional races, and then all the best guys and gals get together and they have a big shootout at the end of the year. And they wanted me to represent 𝗕cie𝗿𝘁 in this big shootout at the end of the year. And I said, well, that's great, but my dad made me a deal, and he said he'd pay for 1 year, and he sticks to his word. So I'm out of luck. And he said, well, what if we paid for it? And all of a sudden, all the synapses just went off in my brain. Like, that's how you go professional racing. You get somebody else to pay for it.
Yeah.
So, so I did the bare minimum to qualify. They paid for it. It was great. Come to find out, I was their sort of backup driver, and they had a guy out of the Southeast that was their kind of A driver. We get to the runoffs in Ohio, and long story short, I ended up finishing third, and their kind of A guy finished like 20th. So that turned into going into professional racing and World Challenge in 1996 in a BMW. And that really is what sort of launched my professional racing career.
So what track were you at in Ohio?
Mid-Ohio, just outside of Mansfield.
Really? And so you were still driving a Camaro?
Still driving a Camaro. And had a local mechanic, a really nice guy named Scott Rubin, who prepped the car, drove it out there, used the family Suburban and an open trailer, hauled it all the way out there. It was the first time I ever got on an airplane to go do a race. And, it's runoffs is tough. It's a week-long event, but you only end up driving maybe, I forget exactly, but maybe 30 minutes a day. So there's just a lot of standing around, a lot of anxiety. And, if you make a change on the car, you don't have a lot of time to try it. And it was a new track for me. And so anyways, there was a lot of obstacles, a lot of hurdles, but in the end, it certainly worked out well for me.
So when you were doing all this stuff, obviously I've gotten to ride in the car with you once or twice. So were you able at an early age, when you even doing the karting, you could see the lines and understand it? Like today, it's so much, I'm not going to say it's easier, but I mean, you've obviously trained me. I mean, you can show us lines. I mean, you didn't have that technology. So how did you get through? I mean, you think it was just a gift, or how did you do that?
Great question. I coach some people these days, and there's so many more tools available. YouTube, for example, you could go to nearly any track and you can find an in-car video, not just any video, but you could probably find an in-car video of the specific car you're driving on that track. And it may not be a great example, but at least you get a sense for what the track looks like and where the brake markers might be, what the line looks like. You have virtual reality simulators, so you can actually drive a car just like yours or very similar to yours on racetracks and get the flow and the rhythm. And so in a lot of respects, it's much easier learning a new track now. Then, I was real lucky to get my hands on a third-hand VHS tape of a car that wasn't even related of a track to just get a sense for what it was like, and required getting there at least a day early and walking the track. And I always talk to as many people. I would talk to anyone and ask their advice, and you could very quickly sort out, who you should listen to and who you shouldn't. But even still, almost everybody has some little pearl of wisdom that I would remember. And so the preparation was definitely different and definitely more challenging. But in the end, just like trying to be successful in anything else, it's preparation is key.
So go back. So we jumped over it, but you got to drive a 914/6, which is, hindsight, and now we know was an incredible car, super fast, super lightweight, excellent track car. I mean, what was that like driving that at such a young age? I mean, because that's an incredible car.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about this because I'm doing a track day with my oldest son for the first time in a GT3 RS, which is so much more car, and it shifts for you, or you have paddle shifts. And when I learned to drive, I had to learn how to drive a stick, and then I had to be very proficient at heel and toe shifting. And if I missed a shift and blew up the engine, that was it. Like, there was no more driving.
That's right.
So there's just a lot more I had to learn. And people of my era and before, it was even harder. So the 914/6 was a great platform, but I was just purely going off of feel and I like a lot of endeavors, you wish you could go back and do it again, but I just tried to make the most of it. Never wrecked it and never did any damage. So I guess I did all right. But I think it was, again, getting back to talking to as many people as I could, talking to the fast drivers. What are they doing? How are they doing it? How do you take turn 3, and where are you getting on the gas? And are you early apexing? Just asking a lot of questions and trying to distill that down to what I could manage in the car that I was driving.
How did you determine the limits of these vehicles? There's such a fine line, right, between out of control and in control. I mean, you're riding on that edge all the time. How did you determine that? I mean, you were driving this car, which, by today's standards is very antiquated, knowing the limits and understanding. I mean, you're having to feel that with your seat, right? I mean, literally, you're not looking at data. You're feeling it with the inertia and the G's. And where did you learn that line? I mean, because I push these cars, then I get in the car with you, and I'm like, oh, wow, okay, I'm not even close. I mean, you think it was a gift, or how did you get to that point? I mean, you had to spin out at some point and push it, right?
Yeah. Finding the limit, whether, racing a prototype, which I did for many years, or driving on an old pickup truck on a gravel road, which are sort of two extremes. the one commonality, and a lot of people overlook this, but you look at these sports cars and they have big wings, and people are talking about, oh, I want to change the springs or the shocks or this or that. All of those things are there to make the tire work better. And so finding the limit is really getting a sense and a feel for anytime you're asking something from the tire, you're maximizing the amount of traction that's available. So going down a straightaway, anybody can do that. You just hold your foot on the floor, you shift. It's not hard. Where it starts to get hard is determining where to brake, and you want to brake as late as you can because you're trying to make that straightaway as long as possible. That's why these supercars and hypercars and race cars have these gigantic brakes, because you're trying to make those straightaways as long as possible. When I started off in the 914.6, there's no ABS, so you really had to have a good feel for when you were just about locking up the brakes, or maybe you did lock it up and quickly getting off of it. Nowadays with ABS, you don't have to worry about locking up the brakes, but you still need to brake in such a way that you don't compromise the line going into a corner. And then it's knowing and having a feel for releasing the brake so that you keep the tire on edge as you're entering the corner, and then going back to throttle, keeping the tire on edge as you're exiting. So whoever does the best job of getting the maximum amount of keeping the tire at the absolute edge of adhesion every time you're asking something of it, that's the fastest driver.
Huh. Okay. So what you're saying is it's all about the tires.
It's all about the tires.
Making sure you make them work.
You could take a car, and if you just change tires, it's the single biggest improvement you can make on any tire. I've done a lot of work with Michelin over the years, tire testing, and it's unbelievable when you're testing tires, the difference a tire can make in terms of lap times, in terms of confidence, in terms of just overall grip and longevity. It really is a most important part of any car.
That's interesting. So we'll jump back to where we were. That's okay. Now I'm just going to change my tires more often.
Well, change them if you're already getting the maximum out of the tire. And yeah, it takes some time and some seat time to sort of know what that feels like. But yeah, you really want to have the tire unhappy with you every time you ask something of it.
Okay. All right. I'm going to remember that. I think I'm actually going to see you in, are you going to be in Road Atlanta in a couple of weeks?
I don't know, but I think I will see you in Sebring or Daytona. Something
okay,
like
good.
that.
Hopefully Daytona. I will. That's a new one for me too. So that'll be exciting.
Great.
So you finally get third, and now all of a sudden you're getting some people's attention, obviously, in this one event. And where does that start going from there? I mean, you got to fly in a plane, got somebody else to pay for it. Now you start to get tires that aren't costing you money. So tell me what happens next.
So after the runoffs in 1995, I spoke with Larry Krause at 𝗕cie, and he said, "Hey, what do you think about pro racing?" And I don't remember exactly if I brought it up first or he brought it up first, but we sort of were thinking the same thing. And the big challenge was what Pro Series allowed a DOT tire, a Department of Transportation. It's a tire that's legal on the road as opposed to like a tire on a Formula One car. It's not legal on the road. So DOT is a kind of a specific type of tire. Not very many racing series, professional racing series run on a DOT tire. So I had to find, if they were going to pay for it, if 𝗕cie was going to pay for it, I had to find a series where a DOT tire was eligible.
Because they're selling DOT tires. I mean, that's their market.
The whole point is they wanted to break into and build a name and a brand in the U.S. as a high performance quality tire.
Gotcha.
So Yeah, and the only way that works is, you put some points up on the board in professional racing, and it helps. Then you have some credibility when you're trying to tell people it's a good tire, and it was. And so the only series that I could find was 𝗕cie𝗿𝗁𝘀𝘁 World Challenge. So I didn't know anybody in that space, and so I was go through old race results, and I kept seeing this team called Last Minute Racing, and they ran BMWs, and it was a small, scrappy team, but boy, they won a lot of races. And so I figured out how to get a hold of the team owner, and the guy wouldn't call me back. And, it just felt like I called the guy 10 times. Finally, I left him a message. I figured I had nothing to lose. I left him a message, and I said, listen, I'm fast and I've got money. Give me a call. And he did. And so we put a deal together, and I ended up racing his BMWs in 1996 and 1997. Won some races, qualified on the pole. This is against, factory GM team with Saturn, factory Honda team with Peter Cunningham. It was a great experience. Really learned about racecraft, and I hadn't had a lot of experience leading up to that, so it was drinking out of a fire hose for sure. And then that led to an introduction to a guy named Tom Milner, who ran BMW of North America's professional racing team in the ALMS, and I met with Tom, and we liked each other. And he said, hey, if you could bring 𝗕cie𝗿𝘁𝘁 to the table, I can put you in one of these factory cars, and you can join the big leagues. So growing up in and around the Silicon Valley, my dad was a high-tech turnaround CEO. So I was fortunate to have be able to sort of lean on his Rolodex of contacts. And there was a banker friend of his, a guy named Brian Bean, who helped me immensely, helped me sort of figure out what the value proposition was. It's clear what I wanted, but like any relationship, what's in it for the other person. And ended up putting together a marketing package, talking to people. I mean, I would call anybody, meet with anybody. And anyways, I got the money together and raced on the factory BMW team with 𝗕ance, famous German driver, 𝗕cie𝗿𝗁𝘀𝘁, who went on to do some NASCAR stuff, fantastic guy, Peter Cunningham, Bill Auberlen, and others. So it was again, a huge jump, definitely drinking out of the fire hose, and was on a factory race team just a couple years into professional racing.
So this was still in the late 90s, early 2000s?
This was 99 and 2000.
Yeah, and I mean, it all sounds easy. You're like, oh, well, yeah. But I mean, you were barely sending emails. I mean, you make the one comment about, the guy would never call you back. Well, I'm sure people on this like, wow, call us, cell phone. Well, like, yeah, well, they didn't actually have cell phone. I mean, you were leaving voicemails on a recorder.
Yeah, or with,
yeah.
the person at the shop picking up the phone. So it was,
literally.
It's definitely a different era.
Yeah. Yeah. You couldn't just fire off an email and hope somebody responds, or, I mean, it was hard.
It took a lot of persistence. You learned how to navigate, especially dealing with CEOs, forming a good relationship with their assistant. And because if they don't like you, you're never going to get through.
That's right.
But if they feel like they like you, or at least want to help you out, or whatever, like, then you have a chance at least getting your message handed to them. So it learned a lot in those years. It was really fun times.
Yeah, everybody thinks of you as a great race car driver, and little do people know you're a great salesman. I mean, it's what you are. I mean, you have to be.
You have to be, and I think I learned that, or that was brought into focus. One of my first big sponsors is a company called Flextronics. It's a contract manufacturing firm, and the guy who was at the helm is a guy named Michael Marks, who I consider a mentor. In fact, his son Justin Marks owns the NASCAR team Trackhouse Racing.
Oh, wow.
And Michael was, he basically at one point or another just said, I don't care what you do, you have to be able to communicate your vision and the excitement and your passion for it. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful. And he was really good at that. And he turned this business 𝗕tože into kind of a nobody to the number one contract manufacturing firm in the world. And, so contract manufacturing, if you're Xerox and you have a new printer coming out, you have them build it so you don't have to invest in a big factory. And if it's a success, it's easy to scale. And if it's a failure, it's easy to shut it down. So it ended up becoming a very attractive avenue for a lot of hardware makers to use these contract manufacturers. And it became a spectacular business.
Wow. So you're on the BMW now team, and now you're officially living your dream, which you always had, or thought you had. You didn't know until, I'm sure it really became a dream when you were doing it, week in and week out. I know it's, it all looks sexy and fun, but it's a lot of travel, a lot of hard work, and probably a lot of, not so much fun, times on airplanes and crappy hotels. So you're fighting through all this. Where do you go from BMW? So you're still early 2001, you said?
Yeah. So starting really 96 with 𝗕cie𝗿𝘁𝘁, 95 with 𝗕cie𝗿𝘁, through 2003, it was just constant fundraising. So in that period of time, I raised about $6 million from various businesses trying to support this very expensive activity that I was engaged in. And I was young, I was single, I didn't have any connection. So I lived on the road and stayed with friends in New York. And it was a wonderful experience. But it's this constant, every racing is spring to fall. And, every August, it wasn't exactly clear what the next year looked like. So it was always hustling, trying to raise money, trying to make sure the program for next year was going to be successful. Because if you're not successful, then it's a lot harder to raise money. So I did after BMW in 2001 and 2, I did a World Challenge program again, but with a Porsche in the next class up that 𝗕tože sponsored. And Justin Marks, Michael's son, and now the principal at Trackhouse, was my teammate. It was his first racing experience. And during that time, really good friend of mine, Craig Watkins, was the engineer, hired this really good guy named Eric Ingraham as a team manager. And my crew chief at the time was Tommy Sadler. And I'm telling you this because it ends up going into the next part of the story. Had some pretty decent success in World Challenge with the Porsches. And then in 2003 at Daytona, that same group of people, plus a strategist, a guy named Thomas Blom, who I met along the way, was invited to do Daytona with a local gentleman group that had an older Porsche race car. And so Craig engineered it, and we were really fast. We led the 24 hours of Daytona for, up until we got a hole in the radiator and we had to come in and fix it. But in the end, we finished third overall in a GT car at the 24 hours of Daytona. And watching that race was a venture capitalist guy from the Silicon Valley who wanted to go racing. And that led to the formation of Flying Lizard Racing, which was became the premier Porsche sports car, professional sports car racing, endurance sports car racing team in the country, if not the world, and helped Seth start that in 2003 and brought in the group that I'd been working with in my World Challenge program. Some of those people are still at Flying Lizard to this day. And so starting in 2004 through 2009, Flying Lizard won a bunch of championships. We went to Le Mans 3 times, finished on the podium at Le Mans, and was teammates with most of the Porsche factory drivers at that point in time. A lot of success, a lot of good times, and it was fun building a team that was so successful and so dominant for so many years.
Yeah, that's so go, because I'm obviously intrigued by the cars. So in the 2003, were you racing like a 996 GT Cup at that point, or were you making cars, or how did that work?
In 2003, it was a Porsche has done a fabulous job of with their customer racing program.
Okay.
So they build cars that they sell to consumers, to race teams. And so at Daytona 2003, we had an older factory. It was a 996 GT3 RS, and then came the RSR, but it was basically an RSR. And then when we started Flying Lizard in 2004, it was then an RSR, and then I think in 2007 it went to the 997 RSR.
And so would that have been a sequential clutch system, or how did those work?
The 996s were all H pattern, conventional manual transmissions, and then the 997s had a sequential gearbox. So you could, and a sequential gearbox is, for those that don't know, it's like a motorcycle. So it's you just, in the case of the Porsche, you pull back up to upshift, and you just keep pulling back until you reach top gear. And then if you need to downshift 3 times, you just push the lever 3 separate times forward.
With the clutch, though.
And you use the clutch on the downshift, but not the upshift. And they manufacturers have gone to this in racing because it's just, if you look on a graph between a manual traditional shift and a sequential or paddle shift, there's no delay between shifts, so the lap times end up being dramatically better, especially over the course of a race with a sequential type gearbox.
So I have a picture of you in my 997 that, remember, you came to Sebring and drove that. You were the first person I ever rode in a car with, in that car. I ended up buying it. And so just so people know that, Johannes actually taught me how to drive in that clutch. And boy, once you learn, I finally got the aha in Road Atlanta. I think you were there with me there. And once you figure out how to work that thing, it is an amazing design. I mean, it works. I mean, it's just shocking how much better it is.
It is, and it does require a bit of coordination. But once you sort of figure that out, it's very seamless.
So, out of all the cars, you've got to race some of the best cars in the world, just because I want to ask this question now. I mean, what's your all-time favorite? Like, which one, like, of the generations? I mean, the BMWs, great cars, win a lot of races still. But I mean, I'm obviously a Porsche guy, but I mean, what do you think the best car you ever drove was? Funnest, most enjoyable?
Race cars are tough. I mean, it's really a function of how well a driver communicates what the car needs to the engineer, and then the engineer taking that information, perhaps looking at data. Every engineer is different, and then adjusting the car accordingly. And anytime you drive a car, you always want to ask yourself, okay, what's the car preventing me from doing? What would I like to do that I can't do? And if it's on a straightaway where you're flat on the gas, well, it doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter.
But if it's a corner leading onto a long straightaway and you just can't put the power down, well, you got to fix that, because again, it's all about making the straightaways as long as possible. So all that as a preamble, the Porsches, when they were right, were magical. But the car that was consistently good and we had to tune the least was both the 430 and 458 Ferrari, which I raced in the ALMS. And those cars were absolute weapons. I mean, they were just so capable, so nice to drive, and incredibly fast for what they were.
Now, did they have Tiptronics, or what kind of shifting systems did those have?
They had a sequential gearbox to start, and then went to a paddle shift gearbox, just like you'd have in a more modern sports car.
So do you like the sequential over the paddle, or what is your? I mean, I got to drive a GT4 Cup with the paddle shifters. Obviously being an amateur, you just put that thing in drive and it shifted better than I could ever shift. I mean, it was obviously a PDK design. I mean, that stuff is just mind blowing how good it is.
Yeah, in the car space, there's this resurgence of interest in manual transmissions, which I get because it's more engaging, and when you do it well, it's very satisfying. But a manual transmission is like a rotary phone, and a paddle shift car is like an iPhone. There's some nostalgia to it, but if you're just purely trying to go as fast as you can around a racetrack, paddle shift is the best way to go, because you can shift, you eliminate. So like your sequential, you still have to use the clutch, so you're a bit limited at times, and it's definitely more active in the car, getting more exercise. So I guess that's good. But with a paddle shift car, you just have the brake and the throttle, and it enables you to keep both hands on the wheel all the time. And it also enables you to do some shifts mid-corner if the situation presents itself. You get stuck in traffic and you need to downshift really quickly. It's much easier to adapt to the conditions with a paddle shift car, and it's just less work. So if you're doing long stints in a car, less work is better.
Well, I'm glad you at least picked the Ferrari. I was getting worried because you had said, you spent all this time raising money. I thought about you as a politician. I thought you were going to answer that as a politician, but at least you did tell me it was the Ferrari. So that makes me feel better.
I can't lie. A lot of people say, hey, what's the best car you've ever driven? Also a Ferrari, a car from the 70s, a 312 PB, which is basically their F1 car that they put a body on for the Targa Florio. And I drove that car a couple of times, and it is magic.
Really?
Just the handling, the sound it makes, the nimbleness. It's like a big go-kart that shifts at 12,000 RPM. It's just incredible.
Well, something else people don't talk about is that if you look around and getting around all you guys and stuff like that, it's amazing how many y'all are just incredible athletes as well. Cause you still very athletic. Do you ride bike a lot? You ride your bike a lot? Still cycling?
Yeah. I'm a big cyclist. I started off as a runner, but faulty genetics and my knees just don't like it. And, so I gravitated towards a bike, which the downside is it's a hard thing to do when you travel. But I still very much enjoy getting out on the bike and getting some fresh air and exercise. Great physically, but it's also great mentally to sort of almost use it as a sort of meditative time during the day. And it's something I never do enough of, but do it as much as I can.
Do you still have a track that you really enjoy to go to still to this day, that one of your favorite tracks? I mean, I know you're at VIR last weekend, which a lot of people love.
Yeah, VIR is a fantastic track. In fact, qualified on the pole in the Ferrari there when I think in 2012. You can still find it on YouTube. I did something for, I think it was ESPN or NBC about the pole position lap. Road America is, is a great place, and I always like going to 𝗕tože𝗂𝘁𝘁 because I can just get in my car and drive, which is a luxury these days. And then internationally, there's a track in Belgium called 𝗕cie S-P-A, that is, next level fast and smooth and very lovely place to drive a car. And then probably the granddaddy of them all, primarily for the ambiance and the experience, is Le Mans, which I've had the good fortune of doing 5 times. And, it's sort of like the biggest F1 race you can imagine, but with sports cars for 24 hours. It's just, for anybody that has any interest, I highly recommend going as a spectator. It's really one of those events that's truly bigger than any one manufacturer or driver. It's just this amazing event and experience. And so that's one track that, it's not a lot of people have driven because it's only open, basically 1 week a year, but it's definitely probably at the top of the list.
Well, as these things always go really fast, we got to kind of end it here. And I was just, with all the experiences you've had in your life and, getting, I guess, ultimately living the dream that you always probably did, is since you said you were, playing with Matchbox cars. I mean, do you think through all this, do you think you were born, or do you think you were made through this process?
Well, I think it's both. I think I was lucky enough to be born in California, but most importantly in the United States, where there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. And
I was born to, a family and a father who was, a high functioning, take action kind of guy that was all about results, and fortunate to, tap into, nothing was handed, but at least I had a very fuzzy roadmap of people I could possibly call that led to other calls that led to other calls. And finally, 15 calls later, you get to somebody that you ended up doing something with. And, I thought about this a lot. If I was a kid born in South America in a small village, no way any of this could have happened despite it. And, on the other hand, I like to think I made the most of the opportunities that were presented, and I hustled and worked really hard for a lot of years to do it. So, I don't think one would happen with the other.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, there's no wrong answer. It's always fun to hear what other people say. So, but thanks for spending the, 45 minutes with us today, Johannes. I always enjoy seeing you in person, and actually enjoyed talking to you today even more. So thank you for the time and joining the Born and Made podcast.
Thanks for having me, Larry. Look forward to seeing you again soon at a racetrack.
Yes, sir.